This is the Six Wine Stories wine presentation from the 28th of September, I think it was. For those of you who don't remember, Six Wine Stories is about some guys sitting around, shooting the breeze and talking about wine and having a good old chat together. This particular section of Six Wines is about the old vine. What does it mean to be an old vine? There's an old vine. This particular old vine is in the region of Toro. Maybe it's 70 or 80 years old. And here's another one from the Priorat. Doesn't look so old, but it's not grown so much because it's like a bonsai. It's been growing in very, very poor soil. So the first thing that happens with a vine is to think that it's not really about a single plant. It's about a vineyard, so a collection of plants all together. And the first people we're going to talk about are the Gomez family from Vega Tolosa in Manchuela, which is sort of inland from Valencia. Casas Ibañez is the name of the town where they're from. So we're talking about old vines and how old is an old vine? Well, the first thing is that vines die. You plant a vineyard and you get all these vines together, and then some of them start to die. There are two ways they can die. Basically, they can die from the leaves down or from the roots up. This is a photograph actually taken in Rioja a couple of weeks ago of a vine which is dying from the leaves downward. So they've marked the plant because they can see it's already dying. Even though it's got grapes this year, it started to die. And they've marked it because when autumn comes and it's time to prune, they'll remember that this one is the dead one. But it may not be totally dead. What they can do to begin with is like this one here. They can chop it off and then bring out a new trunk and hope that they've just taken off the dead part and that the disease hasn't reached the roots yet. So they can make it grow again and sort of bring it back to life. But sometimes you just can't do that, and you're left with a hole in your vineyard. And eventually, this particular vineyard is planted in 1996, so it's 27 years old. It's not really very old, but eventually you're going to get to a state where you've got lots of holes in your vineyard. And if you're a farmer, and you're really, that's your main activity, you're going to want to replant that vineyard because there's just not enough plants anymore. Despite the fact that the quality may be very, very high, eventually you're going to say, well, here, you can see there's so many plants have died out, I've got to replant. And that might happen after 40, 50 years already. You've already got too few plants left. So you decide to rip it out and plant the whole thing again. So you start off with a young vineyard again, something like this young vineyard here. This is like a 3-4-year-old vineyard with the trunks protected against being eaten by rabbits or roe deer. And this is the case of Finca Los Halcones. Los Halcones means the falcons, and this is a vineyard in Manchuela. Manchuela is almost like a part of La Mancha, but it's where the rivers are starting to cut through and create these creeks and deep valleys, and you get all these beautiful birds of prey flying above them. So Los Halcones is a Sauvignon Blanc, which comes from a relatively young vineyard, and in this area, it's sort of inland from Valencia. So how do vineyards get to be very old? If they're going to be dying out by 40, 50 years old, that's not really becoming very, very old and producing really great quality. So how does it happen that some vineyards survive? What do people do? Well, first of all, in some cases, the vines don't die. They're maintained. And this is David Inchaurraga. He's going to introduce himself here.
Me llamo David Inchaurraga, y soy miembro de la familia propietaria, que es la familia Herrero. Adquiere este viñedo en 2003. aunque bueno, este viñedo data de 1973, que cuando se compran las tierras, que aquí no había absolutamente nada plantado, y en 1974 se plantan pues todas las garnachas viejas que tenemos, que son prácticamente de 50 años, plantadas en 1974.
And this is in the area of Rioja Baja, so in theory it's the poorer quality area of Rioja, but it's up on a hillside. It's in a slightly cooler area, so it's not one. It's actually one of the best parts of Rioja for planting Garnacha. And David's family, actually his wife's family, bought the vineyard in 2003. The vineyard had belonged to a company called Rumasa. Now, those of you who know a bit about Spanish history might like to go and find out a bit more about Rumasa. It was eventually expropriated by the Spanish government in the 80s, and all of the properties were auctioned off. So this is a large estate. It's about 80 hectares of old vineyard which had planted in the 70s. It remained as one single old vineyard. You can see here they've started to lose a few of the vines from this vineyard, but still has a large quantity of old Garnacha. And David's wife studied winemaking. They've got this little winery up here on the hill there, and there they're making about 10,000 bottles of this really beautiful, fine Garnacha. Garnachas are more typical from the Mediterranean area. So the next old vineyard we'll see is made by Juan Carlos Barriovero, and this is at Tempranillo.
Hola, mira, soy Juan Carlos Barriovero, propietario de la bodega Señorío de Barriovero, y os quiero presentar pues un viñedo propiedad de la bodega.
¿Dónde estamos?
Estamos en Entrena, Rioja Alta.
So we've moved a little bit up the river from Turrería up to Entrena. It's not a huge, maybe it's about 30 kilometers apart, but now we're getting into Rioja Alta, so much more cooler climate, continental climate, and much better for growing Tempranillo. Juan Carlos has actually a large factory, but not to make wine. His factory is more for packaging olives and gherkins and that sort of thing. But they're a family who've been in Entrena for 4 centuries, so like everybody else, have little bits of vineyard here and there. And he uses his best grapes. These are the best Tempranillo. It's about an 80-year-old vine to make about 10,000 bottles of this special selection called Deposito 40. All of the wines, apart from the white, all of the wines will spend about a year in barrel, and this is the case of this wine too. So fine old vine Tempranillo. The next story is from Ribera del Duero, and I went to see Eugenio de Blas. He's going to make a little presentation of himself as well here.
Eugenio de Blas Pascual, un socio de los 3 que somos. Somos Eugenio, Luis Miguel y mi cuñado José Manuel. Luis Miguel, mi hermano.
So they're from the little village of Fuente el Césped. It's a family company, as you can see. Genin, as he's called, Eugenio likes to be called Genin, his brother and his brother-in-law. And they're from this little village of Fuente el Césped, which doesn't sound particularly, it's not very well known within Ribera del Duero, but it has one specific difference, which makes it a little bit different from the rest of Ribera. This is a stone which shows that Fuente el Césped was given its independence from the church lands in 1618. Most of Ribera belongs to the church, and when the church lands were sold off in the 19th century in a series of sort of government auctions called desamortizaciones, so large estates were sold. But in this area, in this little village, all of the land had been divided up into really tiny plots between all the people of the village. So there were very few, if any, professional grape growers. Jenin worked all of his life in Aranda de Duero in the Michelin factory, and had just started to make wine really now that he's retired. And together with his brother and brother-in-law, they've put together their small holdings, and little by little, he's starting to work, because it's all of these little plots you can see here in the photograph. They're all owned by different people, but they're all people of that sort of age, in their 70s and 80s. And step by step, Jenin is sort of buying up people's bits of land, putting them together into larger estates. And they're all old vines, because nobody here really has the money or the inclination to replant their vines. So I've got a lot of 80, 90-year-old vines, and together they've then built their own winery called De Blas Serrano, for the two family names. This is Filos. This is this entry-level Ribera. It's made from Tinta del País, which is the name that they use in Ribera del Duero for Tempranillo. It's actually a 100% Tempranillo wine, again aged for a year in barrel. Really fine, elegant, and very typical Ribera del Duero. The other way you can get hold of old vineyards is to have your great-great-grandfather plant them, which is the case of the Greffoy family, who people who've been to tastings before know make the Gran Predicat in the Priorat. This is Paul.
Bon dia, soc Paul Greffoy, de Cellers Greffoy de Clara.
So Paul actually here is standing in front of the old Carignana vines, which make the Gran Predicat. We're about 500 meters from the village of El Molar, from the village itself, but within the municipality. This is the village looking at it from the east, so looking towards the Mediterranean. On the left-hand side is a Priorat, and on the right-hand side, just out of shot, is another old Carignana vineyard, which he used to make as Viñas Centenarias, Tosales. So it's 100-year-old vines, actually planted in 1914. So, just after the phylloxera. Well, phylloxera was in the 1890s. By the beginning of the next century, they started to plant vineyards again. And the symbol on the label there is the dog. Merlot, his Paul's dog. Unfortunately, the dog died this year. And then finally, the other option is you can go and buy a small plot of vineyard. This is from a company down in Valencia, well, in the town of Requena. It's owned by the Schenk family, who came from Switzerland in the 1920s, built up a large bulk business to begin with, and then started bottling cheaper wines, and then step by step they've bought some older vineyards, and they now have this old Bobal vineyard in Requena, which they've called a Casa la Seda. There's a long history behind Requena as a silk-producing town. That's why La Casa la Seda means the silk house. And underneath Requena, from this spot here where this photograph is taken, beneath our feet, is this. All the old wine cellars are built right underneath the town in this absolute labyrinth of old wine cellars where the wine was stored in jars. So this is, again, a very old vine, Bobal in this case, also aged for 1 year in barrel. And there you have the 6 different wines. Okay, so thanks for listening. Enjoy your wine. Cheers.